You. Yeah, you. Let's try a quick psychological experiment. Look at this image and tell me, what do you see? Answer out loud in 3, 2, 1. Very interesting. I believe that's a sign of sexual frustration. Just kidding, I didn't even hear your answer. And besides, these types of tests don't necessarily work the way that we imagine. So stick around because in this video we're gonna be talking about them. This is the Rorschach test, probably the most famous psychological test in the world. It's meant to reveal important details about your personality, and all that you have to do is say what you see in these images. It's popped up everywhere, in old cartoons, in new Netflix shows, in post-apocalyptic video games, on this guy's face from Watchmen, and probably plenty of adult content too, I would assume. I don't know, I'll have to look into that. However, what exactly is the deal with this test? Where does it come from? How does it work? And does it even work? Well, the Rorschach test was invented in 1918 by Swiss psychiatrist Hermann Rorschach, who, if a movie were to be made about him, I think he should have been played by Brad Pitt. That is one handsome psychiatrist. In his childhood, Rorschach was a big fan of klexography. And if you don't know what klexography is, then you probably didn't grow up in the 19th century. Klexography is the art of creating images from ink blots. The idea was to take a sheet of paper, drop some ink on one half, then fold the paper, creating a symmetrical sort of abstract image that if you squint could be mistaken for a work of art. Pretty cute, and if I'm not mistaken, I did something like this in art class myself when I was little. Let me know in the comments if they still have klexography class in schools, or was it replaced by a, I don't know, Instagram filter class or something. Anyway, point is, it was a much more popular activity in the past, and Hermann Rorschach was really into it, like really into it. He liked it so much that his nickname was even Klex, which in German means ink blot. And you can only imagine how obsessed someone has to be to get a nickname like that. It's like being so obsessed with Minecraft that your friends start calling you Blocky or something. When he grew up, Rorschach became a psychiatrist, and he would eventually incorporate his passion for ink blots into his medical practice, which was quite creative and novel for the time. However, he wasn't the first one to imagine that these abstract shapes could hold hidden meanings. For example, the German poet Justinus Kerner in 1857 wrote an entire volume of poems, each inspired by one such ink blot. He would look at an ink blot, he would let the muses take hold of him, and then he would write a poem about what he saw. Here, let's read one of them. O thou devilish visage, art thou human or art thou cat? What doth he want for... You know what? I changed my mind. Let's not read a poem. I think everybody gets it. In the past, there was also a board game called Gobo Links, where participants created some ink blot images, then they would add some extra details and write little funny presentations or poems that describe what the image might be. Way before that, even Leonardo da Vinci was toying around with this idea, talking about how random shapes like stains or rocks or cracks can inspire works of art if you let your imagination make unexpected connections. So, the idea is pretty old, but Hermann Rorschach was the first to use this concept in a medical and scientific way. He began by showing his patients these types of images, which old Dr. Inkblot probably had plenty of lying around, and then he would ask them what they saw. He noticed that they often gave similar answers, except for the patients who had schizophrenia. These subjects had trouble formulating a response, saw the images as being in motion, or had bizarre, fragmented, and paranoid interpretations. And thus, the Rorschach test was born, a new and potentially revolutionary method for diagnosing schizophrenia. And that was just the beginning. The test would go on to encompass much more in the following decades, but before we get into all of that, I'm sure everybody's just dying to know what my interpretation of these ink blots is. Let's see. Okay, this is clearly a human pelvis or a bat. Next, these are two people who are high-fiving and low-fiving with their feet as well, and their feet and their head is red for some reason. These are two people who are fighting over a bra. That's a bra, and they really want the bra for some reason. This looks like a chicken, like a spatched cock chicken, or maybe a chicken wearing loose clothes like a rapper. This is obviously another bat. I see bats are very common in this test. This is like some sort of a flying insect carrying an animal hide, like it's just killed the animal and now it's dragging the hide away to its nest for making a rug or something. These are obviously two chimps about to kiss each other, making kissy faces at each other. This right here reminds me of the female reproductive system, but not
not in the dirty way, in the scientific diagram sort of way with the internal organs, that thing. Or if you flip it around, it looks like a panther prowling along a lake and then the reflection of the panther in the lake. That's kind of a pretty neat picture like that. And then this is just gas and fire and explosions, and this is two seahorses holding hands surrounded by other sea creatures, and there's a crab up top pinching their noses. Okay. That was my interpretation. If there's any psychiatrists out there, feel free to offer a diagnosis. Maybe I can finally figure out what's wrong with me.
Dr. Hermann Rorschach experimented with hundreds of such images and chose 10 that seemed to be most suitable for his tests. I would have chosen 8 myself, but hey, to each their own, I guess. After picking the images and experimenting with them, he wrote about his discoveries in a book called Psychodiagnostik. But unfortunately, shortly after publication, he died unexpectedly as a young man, leaving unfinished the area of study he had just created. But not for long. Other psychologists and psychiatrists were fascinated by Rorschach's ideas and continued the research he started. In the decades that followed, numerous studies were conducted, numerous books were written, numerous ink blots were interpreted, until the Rorschach test became the most widely used psychological test in the world, and not just to detect schizophrenia as it was originally intended, but as a general personality test. It started to be used all over the place, not just in hospitals, but also in courtrooms, the armed forces, criminal investigations, employment screening, and of course, all of the cartoons and movies and stuff that I mentioned earlier. However, with all this popularity comes the obvious question: does this test even work? Is it actually any good? Well, today the scientific consensus seems to be somewhere on a spectrum from not really to kind of. There's little evidence that the test can actually accurately predict anything specific about a subject. It may be a good way for the therapist to get to know their patient or to understand them better, but it's not something you can rely on as a real medical test, like a blood test or a urine test, or that thing where they hit you in the knee with the little hammer. A scientific experiment is valid if its results are the same no matter how many times the experiment is done, or more importantly, by whom it's done. And with the Rorschach test, that is not at all true. Two different examiners could obtain completely different results analyzing the exact same patient based on their own opinions, feelings, or preconceptions, which means that the Rorschach test is kind of a Rorschach test for both the patient and the psychologist. However, the test definitely does have its uses. After all, if you're a psychologist or a psychiatrist and are not completely useless, then you can understand plenty about your patient if within this image they say that they see a bat or a pair of panties or the embodied essence of evil itself come to earth to devour all of our souls. The Rorschach test is still used today in some places, but not as much as it was in the past. It has lost a lot of credibility since its golden age in the 60s. However, many specialists believe now, and have believed in the past, that the person's perception of an image can indeed provide useful information. Therefore, the Rorschach test is not the only psychological test of this kind. There are various tests that examine the patient's perception of an image. They are called projective tests, and theoretically this video should have been called the Great 8 Projective Tests. But something tells me that this title would not have necessarily been a hit. Probably won't be a hit anyway, even with all the clickbait I put into it. But still, here is a quick look at 7 other lesser-known projective tests, such as the Thematic apperception test, also called TAT, is similar to the Rorschach test, except instead of abstract ink blots, it uses actual images of people, things, and situations. The idea is that the patient must create as dramatic a story as they can about the image being presented. They must come up with a narrative about what has happened up until that point, what the people in the image are feeling, and what the conclusion of the story is. It's kind of like when you post a picture on Instagram and say, caption this, except done for therapy, although they might both be therapeutic, I don't know. The test was invented at Harvard in the 1930s and was partially inspired by the novel Moby Dick, in which a gold coin was nailed to the mast of the ship as a reward for the first person to spot the whale, and each crew member that covets the coin has a different interpretation of the inscription on it, revealing their internal thoughts and priorities. And this is also the idea with the TAT, where the images were created intentionally vague and ambiguous, with the idea that if you make up a story about them, you will subconsciously use experiences from your real life which you would otherwise be reluctant to talk about, or which you yourself don't even recognize until you observe them from the outside. Sounds intriguing? Let's take a look at some of these images.
Okay, in this picture it looks to me like the old lady has done something sneaky, not sure exactly what. It sort of reminds me of poisoning the apple in the fairy tale, and then Fleabag over here is completely clueless. Okay, I guess this could be interpreted as a love scene, but to me it kind of just looks like she murdered somebody and now she's admiring her own work. I think maybe I do have issues. Well, this right here, if I were to be charitable, I would say that he's a hypnotist and he just put the boy to sleep. Otherwise, it's much worse. In this picture, it looks like the guy with the mustache is the other guy's lawyer, and like he just got asked a difficult question, and so the lawyer is leaning in and whispering something into his ear, and then the guy goes, "I plead the fifth," or whatever, you know the thing. Okay, this lady is clearly upset, something's gone terribly wrong, or maybe she's laughing, maybe she's just holding her head laughing because she saw something so funny, I don't know. This lady looks like she's posing for a painting, you know, very stoic sort of pose. And in this picture, it looks like there's a son and his mother, and the son has just admitted a difficult truth, like, "I'm the reason father left," or something like that, and now they're just sort of both sitting in that tense moment right now. This kid is supposed to practice his violin, but he's tired of practicing the violin. He wants to go outside and play with the other children. This lady's clearly upset. I don't think this one's laughing this time, guy. I think this one's pretty upset. I think I even see a gun in the floor. I'm just gonna move on before I get demonetized. Well, I was thinking I have too many negative interpretations, but I mean, look at this. What am I supposed to make of this? What is this, a happy cemetery creepy dude? Why is he in the cemetery? Why is he dressed like that? Why does he look like he just came back from the dead? I don't want us to look at this anymore. Let's move on. Okay, in this picture, the lady is like, "Don't go," but he's like, "I must," but she's like, "No, you can't," and he's like, "I shall," and then he goes off and does like an action movie or whatever. Okay, this is a very creepy picture. I guess in the back they're doing surgery. I hope that's what's happening in the back, surgery and not something else. And then the guy up front, he's looking at you so straight. He's got this look in his eyes like, "You're next." Okay, this guy is climbing a rope. I'm not sure why he's climbing a rope, but considering the way his body looks, I imagine this is just his fitness routine. And I gotta tell you, it's working. That's excellent definition you got there, rope man. And this is like a country girl who aspires to something bigger, like she wants to go to the big city and become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever, but then her family around her is telling her to, "No, don't go, to stay here with us and help us farm the fields." You know, a story old as time, as it were. And there we go. That was my interpretation for the TAT images. So now let's move on to a different projective test, such as...
Another example is the picture frustration test, which is described quite well by its own name. The idea here is that you're presented with images of situations that could cause frustration, and unlike the TAT, these also contain the first part of a dialogue, with the second being left blank to be filled in by the patient. Like this one, where this one guy tells another guy that he's taking his girlfriend to the dance. I'm gonna take the liberty to fill in a potential response here as well. Then there's also this one where a wife sarcastically scolds her husband for losing the car keys. Or this one where you find out that they will not be able to see you even if you do have an appointment. Man, that's just the worst, and I came all the way over there. Or there's this one where a guy just ate and drank the special cake and champagne that were being saved for a special occasion, and not only that, but now he's put his feet up on the table. What a dick. Or this other one where the guy shows very little respect for the antique furniture upon which he once again puts his feet on top of. Apparently feet on the table is a classic in the frustration department. Anyway, the way the patient fills in the dialogue should indicate how they react to frustrating situations in general, making this test much less subtle and abstract than the previous ones, which is kind of similar to the picture arrangement test, which presents a series of comic book style images that had to be arranged in order to create a coherent story. This is pretty straightforward and not necessarily a personality test, but rather an intelligence test meant to find the mental age of children. In fact, because of their simplicity and visual nature, many of these tests are often designed for children, such as the Blackie picture test, in which children had to create stories inspired by images featuring a puppy named Blackie and his family, although I'm not sure if we're still allowed to call him that. At first glance, it's a test that's quite similar to what we've seen already, only with a more friendly, more childish and innocent sort of theme. Except that it's not actually that innocent. This test was meant to evaluate the Freudian stage of psychosexual development in children. And if you don't know anything about Freud's psychosexual theory, then you're lucky, and you might not even want to know, but fair warning, I'm gonna tell ya. According to Freud, every child from the moment of birth begins to develop their libido, their sexuality, and in doing so, they go through 5 distinct stages in which they focus their sexual energy on a certain part of the body. The first stage is the oral stage, in which babies obtain pleasure from their mouths, suckling or exploring the surroundings, and so the mouth becomes an erogenous zone. Next is the anal stage, in which they learn to use the potty, so their source of pleasure now becomes the anus. The third stage is the phallic phallic stage, in which boys between the ages of 3 and 6 discover their bodies, including their phallic components, and this is also the stage where you get the phenomenon called the Oedipus complex, more precisely that thing when boys become sexually attracted to their mothers and compete with their fathers for their affection, which apparently leads to a fear of castration in little boys, while little girls go on to develop a penis envy for not having one of their own. Then there are like 2 more stages where something happens, but I think that's enough baby sex talk for now. Plus, this whole Freudian theory about psychosexual development is not really taken seriously anymore. However, these images of the cute dog Blackie were meant to test what stage children are in. Oral, anal, phallic, and if you look at them that way, then all of a sudden they become much less cute. So let's move on to a different projective test, like the Luscher color test. Invented in 1940s by another Swiss psychiatrist, Max Luscher, this projective test was based on a fairly simple idea: color. Instead of ink blots or comic strips or perverted dogs, Luscher tried to discover psychological traits in people's preference for color. The test was quite simple. You were presented with 8 different colors and you had to arrange them in order from your favorite to your least favorite. Basically, you were making a tier list for colors, as the kids would put it nowadays, or as I would put it, you would make a 8 greatest colors, which is an upcoming video on the channel, by the way. Anyway, these were your choices, and Luscher believed that people who have similar color preferences also have similar personalities, and he tried to test this phenomenon through experiments in which the subjects had to evaluate how well the descriptions given by Luscher matched their actual personality. Which sounds kind of scientific, except that this colorful test has very little credibility in the world of psychology due to the Barnum effect. The Barnum effect, in short, says that people tend to interpret general personality descriptions as if they apply to them personally, even though they could apply to practically anyone. It's what happens with the zodiac or fortune telling and other such things. And even though I understand all of this theoretically, I'm still curious about what the colors have to say about me. So I'm gonna quickly take the test as well.
Alright, so I found this website where you can take the test. Let's begin. Look at the 8 colors over and decide which color you like best. Let's see, which color do I like best? I don't know, I'm gonna choose blue. I'm gonna be a cliche. After blue, I don't know, I guess maybe black, because I'm a bad boy. Then I'm not really sure next. I guess maybe green's alright. I don't mind red. Gray is fine. Yellow, purple, and then the brown. Now we'll be asked to select the cards once again. Don't try to remember. I really gotta do it again. Alright, and the thing is, I can't remember exactly how I did it. Wait, I forget. Anyway, show results. Let's see, I have a report here. Urgently in need of rest, relaxation, peace, and affectionate understanding. My god, that sounds serious. Either holds or wishes to achieve a position of authority in which control can be exerted over events, unlike other people who don't want to control events, I guess. Stress resulting from the effort to conceal worry and anxiety under a cloak of self-reliance and unconcern. That's not even a sentence, bro. The existing situation is disagreeable. What, is that a diss? I feel like he's dissing me. Feels lonely and uncertain as he has an unsatisfied need. What? You're lonely and uncertain. Stress arising from the inability to maintain relationship stability in their desired condition. Is he saying I don't have a girlfriend? Is that what he's saying? Okay, so this is like an anxiety scale. It looks like I'm below average. That doesn't make any sense. Is therefore seeking a relationship providing peaceful and understanding intimacy and in which each knows exactly where the other stands. Well, I guess that's true, but I mean, is there really anybody who doesn't want that? I don't know. Anyway, that's the test. Links on the screen. Take it yourself if you want.
Besides these, there are also psychological tests with images which must be drawn by the patient. For example, the Draw a Person test is a test in which you have to draw a person, and the way you do this should in theory provide information about your personality as well as your level of intelligence. This test was invented in 1926 by an American psychologist whose name was Florence Goodenough, which is a rather bizarre name, but I suppose Goodenough will do. Anyway, her test was intended for children and adolescents, but only if they had not taken drawing lessons in the past, and could in theory test for schizophrenia, but also provide indicators for level of intelligence and other personality traits depending on the proportions of the drawing, where it was placed on the page, the presence or absence of certain details, how thick or thin or straight the lines were, whether the drawing was done in profile, and various other criteria. I took the test myself and I drew a person to find out more about me, but apparently it's useless because again, there is no concrete evidence that this test is a good indicator of personality or IQ, although surely this must say something about me. I mean, look at this guy. I'll let future scholars decide, but But until then, the tree, house, person test was similar and actually inspired by the draw a person test, only instead of a man you had to draw a house, a tree, and a person. The different details of the drawing should indicate different personality traits. Like a house represents family, so a small house could mean a bad family relationship. The tree represents subconscious aspects of the personality, so the thickness of the trunk can indicate inner strength, and the number of branches the number of social connections. And then the person would be a representation of your own person, more precisely how you would like to be perceived by others. Afterward, they would also ask all kinds of questions about the drawing, like who lives in the house, how old is the tree, or how the person in the picture is feeling. And that sounds pretty good in theory, but again, all of these tests are not very reliable. Some less so than others is true, even though they try quite hard to be as scientific as possible. These types of tests have a much more complex evaluation system than their description would suggest. To see this, let's go back to the Rorschach test as an example. So like, how exactly does it work? What, if I see a bat in this picture, does that mean I'm crazy? Well, no, bat is actually the most common interpretation for this image, so if anything, you're normal, but strangely enough, what you actually see in the image isn't even that important. Here's how a test like this would work. First, the examiner sits next to the patient, not in front of him, as to not influence their answers through their facial expressions, and also to see the same thing that they do. Then they hand him the cards, one by one, which the patient can look at however he wants, as much as he wants, and in any orientation that he chooses. The patient provides as many answers as they want about what they see, and the examiner carefully writes down all of the answers. Then they go through each image again, but this time the patient must explain in detail where exactly they saw what they said they saw. After all this, the patient's responses and actions are transposed into a table through a kind of code which takes into account all kinds of variables, such as how many responses were given, how long each response took, whether the entire image was taken into account or just a certain section, whether color had any importance or not, whether negative spaces were used, whether the objects contained movement or were static, whether there were multiple objects, whether the response is detailed or vague, whether the response is common or unusual, and of course, the nature of the object itself, like if it's human or animal or abstract or sexual or food or whatever. Each of these features has a special code that must be filled in. Like if you say that here you saw two seahorses holding hands, the examiner might fill in something like D for common detail plus synthesized response, CF for color shape, P for passive, O for ordinary, A for animal, Fabcom, which means fabulated combination, and a whole bunch of other stuff like that. This creates an intricate table that looks something like this, which represents the actual results of your test. And all this information is then interpreted by a specialist, or more recently by a computer, and only now, based on these codes, can it finally, in theory, say something about you. The methodology is much more scientific than a simple "what do you see here, bro, man you're nuts" sort of approach. It's a complex and detailed process that makes you understand why you need a college degree to do this. And almost all of the projective tests presented in this video are evaluated in similar ways, although as I've said before, none are considered 100% reliable, and some of them are today viewed as more of a pseudoscience, in some cases equivalent to astrology or phrenology even. However, what I find fascinating about these tests, and especially the way that they're evaluated, is that all of this complexity and categorization and tables upon codes and scores and mathematical analysis that barely even works, all of this is simply our attempt as a species to translate human psychology into something physical and measurable. In many ways, psychology is the hardest of the sciences because unlike others where measurements are concrete, analysis are objective, and calculations provide testable predictions, psychology tries to translate into mathematics the most complicated phenomena that we know: human consciousness. Maybe we don't have enough information to apply the scientific method to psychology, or maybe we don't know how to do it yet, or maybe it's not even possible. Maybe our thoughts, emotions, and internal feelings are by their nature intangible and will remain so forever. Or maybe they won't. In any case, I'm glad that there are so many people trying to find these answers, and these images were just a few of our species' attempts so far. I got like a big ink stain right here. I guess that's to be expected. I've been playing with ink, and maybe it's even appropriate for an ink blot doctor, so still kind of sucks.